Hey everyone, this is Brian Holmes with the Strategic Living Podcast and BrianHolmes.com. You're listening to my great friend Stephanie O'Brien, and you are about to be moved by purpose.
I genuinely care about people. I want to serve people. And so that's one thing that I do is I do for some what I wish I could do for everyone, but also I do have boundaries and I have priorities.
Are you longing to know what your purpose is? Are you on the wrong career path? Do you feel like there must be more to life? Don't worry, there's hope. It's time to be moved by purpose. Now your host, Stephanie O'Brien.
Hey, welcome to the Moved by Purpose podcast. It is Stephanie O'Brien. My voice sounds a little bit weird today because I am just overcoming the flu. I'm still in recovery. It was no fun. I took the week off of Christmas, which was lovely, and I was ready to get started yesterday, which was Monday the 28th, and instead was in bed all day. And then today, most of the day, I've been resting. Haven't been in full recovery yet, but I am proceeding with the podcasting interviews that I have scheduled because that is fairly easy. Not necessarily easy, but I don't have to go out anywhere and exert tons upon tons of energy. And I just am kind of sick of being sick, if that makes any sense. There's an airplane flying, so if you guys hear that, I apologize. That was really loud and very random. Anyway, I'm excited for today's guest. I have been waiting to interview him for, I think, over a year now. So I'm really excited that the opportunity has opened up in his schedule. And this is Cliff Ravenscraft. In 2005 of December, Cliff Ravenscraft, together with his wife, Stephanie, founded the General Speaking Production Network, GSPN.TV. But since then, he has produced over 3,200 of his very own podcast episodes devoted to entertainment, family, faith, business, and technology. In December 2006, Cliff launched podcast Answer Man, which is what he is best known for, where he has since helped thousands of individuals and organizations launch successful podcasts through one-on-one consulting and coaching through his Podcasting A to Z online training course. If you were to look at the top 100 podcasts in the business category of iTunes, more than 50 of these shows were created by clients who worked with Cliff. Without any further delay, let's welcome him to the show. Welcome to the show, Cliff. I am so honored and excited to be interviewing you today.
Stephanie, I'm so glad to be here, and I just want to say first, thank you for this opportunity, for allowing me to be exposed to your audience that you've worked so hard to build.
Thank you, Cliff. And I know you have a very successful business, and I'm excited to dive in a little bit more to learn about you. And thank you for taking the time out of your schedule as well. Now, the first question that I ask every guest is to really try getting a feel for you and what were the key events in your life or career that led you to do what you do today?
Sure. So I know you want me to keep this as brief as possible so we can focus on a whole different aspect of our conversation. So I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version in 3 minutes or less. So okay. I'm going to tell you and your audience that prior to doing what I do today, which I'm a full-time podcast producer, consultant, and coach, and I have a business today that thankfully generates over $500,000 in revenue, and I have over 1.5 million people in the world who, if you were to talk about podcasting, my name would probably be brought up in the conversation if you talk to them. So it's an awesome place to be today, but this is where I got started. 10 years ago, I had never did a single podcast. However, I was an insurance agent, and I was also a part-time pastor in a church. And so those were two things that were passions of mine. One was providing for my family, and it was a family-run insurance agency, and it wasn't necessarily a passion after I discovered podcasting as a hobby. So I was very successful in insurance, had been pretty much the most secure financial person that you could possibly have. Being in a family-run insurance agency, I'm not going to get fired. And as far as job security goes, it was about as good as you can get. I was paid extremely well. 10 years ago in insurance, I was being paid well over the average of anybody I personally knew. So I financially, things were going great. And I, on the side, was just in my free time volunteering as a staff pastor of a small church. So I loved serving people. That's something that I feel called to do in my life, is to encourage people, serve people. And so that's a part of my makeup. But what happened was my wife was watching this television show called Lost. Have you ever heard of this TV show?
Oh, yes.
And during the whole first season, she was going on and on about how much she loves it. And I'm like, I just don't get it. And one day I was sitting on the couch doing some stuff on my laptop, and she was watching, I think it was the third to last episode of the first season. And all of a sudden I got hooked. All right, I was like, oh my gosh, who's this guy in the boat trying to steal this kid from the people on a raft? This is crazy. And then there's this underground bunker with a light coming out, shining up to the sky. There's mystery. I'm like,
what is happening?
What is happening on the show? So that's how things got sparked. And what I need to do is tell you that just a couple months before that, I had discovered podcasting as a listener for the very first time. I'm a total geek technology guy and always looking at the latest, early adopter stuff that I can jump in on as far as just as a consumer, just playing around with stuff. And I was following this guy named Leo Laporte from Tech TV a long time ago, and he was no longer with this station on cable. And I was reading his blog, and he was saying, hey, I'm still doing the radio show, and we're going to be starting next week. You're going to be able to listen to me as a podcast. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, I can listen to Leo Laporte as a podcast. And he says, I'm also going to get some guys that I was together with on the Screensavers, and we're going to record a podcast together. And I'm like, what is a podcast? And then I did a little bit of research, and I discovered that podcasts are basically, at the time, audio podcasts are just recorded audio files where people can record their voices and take that MP3 file, upload it to the internet, and then you can subscribe to it and have it automatically delivered to you every time there's a new episode. And so I learned how to use iTunes to subscribe to this podcast that Leo Laporte was creating. And all of a sudden, every week, I'm listening to a new episode of Leo and all those people that I used to love on that TV show talking about the things that I used to love to hear them talk about on the TV show. But now it's audio form, and I can listen to it while I'm driving in the car or going out for a walk or whatever the case may be. And Leo Laporte, that was the first podcast I had ever heard. And then all of a sudden, Leo Laporte's talking about this guy named Adam Curry, who used to be a video jockey on MTV back in the 80s when it first started. And he was one of the co-creators of podcasting. And so I went over and found his podcast called The Daily Source Code. And I'm listening to it, and it's a little bit, raunchy on some of the things that he would say and do. But it was still so interesting and intriguing to me, this new technology. And so I would tune in every day. And one week, I'm listening to Adam Curry and I'm listening to Leo Laporte, two different guys, two different places in the world, and both of them in 1 week mentioned this guy named Father Roderick von Hogen, who's a Catholic priest in the Netherlands who has a podcast. And I tune into his podcast, and I'm not Catholic, but he has a lot of pop culture stuff, so I find myself very interested in his show. And that's how I discovered podcasting. And what I discovered is that people were around the world, anybody could create a podcast. And when I discovered Lost, see, I'm tying it all back in. We're starting to wrap it up, I promise. I discovered Lost with my wife, and I'm like, I wonder if there are podcasts devoted to the TV show Lost. And there were. There was actually 6 of them already.
Oh.
6 different shows. And I subscribed to all 6 of them, and I listened to every episode of every one of them because I was hooked. And one day, this was back in probably November 2005, I started blogging about the TV show Lost on my blog, and I did a theory about what I thought this mystery was and who some of these people were and what their backstory was. And I wrote out this entire theory, and then I called in some audio feedback. Basically, I recorded an audio message, emailed it to one of the podcasters, and he played a 3.5-minute version of my feedback on his show. And that show had thousands of subscribers, and all of a sudden my blog traffic went through the roof. And I got the attention of entertainmentweekly.com or EW.com. They did a whole blog post on my theory. And then all of a sudden, the guys, Ryan and Jenna Zawa, who did the Transmission Lost podcast, who played my voice, they said, Cliff, you ought to do a podcast. And other people said, I loved your theory. You should have a podcast. And it didn't take too much to stroke my ego to think, okay, I'll create a podcast. And it was just a pure hobby for me, Stephanie. That was nothing more than just a hobby. And here's what I thought. Who wants to hear me talk about Lost? There's already 6 other podcasts. And sure, I'm a casual viewer. I'm a little bit more than casual. I research this stuff, but I'm not going to give this in-depth analysis. So I don't know that I could really carry off a weekly show devoted to the TV show Lost. I was interested in technology, but there are people like Leo Laporte, and there's all kinds of other technology podcasts out there that would do much better job than I could ever dream of doing. So I couldn't do a technology podcast. And the other thing I could think of that I was passionate about was my faith. But there were already these, Christian radio broadcasters who have been doing radio broadcasting for the last 50 years who are more theologically sound than anything I could come up with. And so I'm thinking, who would want to hear me talk about anything? And so I figure I'm going to create a podcast, but I'm just going to create a show. I know nobody's going to listen to it. I'm going to create a show. It's going to be called Generally Speaking. And I'm just going to generally speak about anything I want to talk about. And I went to Best Buy, and for $45, I bought a headset and plugged it into my computer, recorded it into some free software, and said, guys, this is who I am. This is how I discovered podcasting, everything I just told you. And then I said, in this podcast, each episode will be devoted to one topic, either technology, Lost, or faith. And you'll know what topic I'm going to talk about by the title and the episode. And if you don't want to hear me talk about one of those topics, you can just delete it and wait for the next topic that you're interested in. Well, the first episode, after I introduced all that, I talked about the TV show Lost. And I had people emailing me left and right saying, Cliff, love this idea. I love your podcast. I love your take on Lost. I could care less about your faith, and I don't want to hear about technology. Would you just talk about Lost in this podcast? So the second episode, I invited my wife to join me because she was the real Lost fan, right?
Yeah.
And so I invited Stephanie to join me. I went out and bought this little cheap mixer and bought a microphone that we shared at the time. We're still under $100 in everything that we've spent up to this point. And the two of us get there and we start talking about the TV show Lost together. And in the second episode, I said, hey, everybody, welcome to the Generally Speaking, or the weekly Lost edition of the Generally Speaking Production Network, because I knew then when somebody said, I want to hear you talk only about Lost, I still knew I wanted to talk about those other topics, so I would create other shows related to them. What had happened, though, is after 3 episodes, we had already had over 10,000 subscribers to our podcast.
Oh, my goodness.
And these are 10,000 people around the world, Sri Lanka, Japan, all throughout the Middle East. I mean, this is crazy. People are listening to our show, and that is how I got started. And then I can tell you that a couple months later, I launched another podcast, which is today called Pursuing a Balanced Life. Actually, almost 700 episodes of that show now. But anyway, that was the show where I could talk about anything and everything I wanted. Then about a month after that, I created a podcast, which is today called Encouraging Others Through Christ, which is, as you might guess, my faith-based show. And then 1 year after podcasting as a hobby, I decided, I wonder if I could ever make a living doing this. And I created a podcast called Podcast Answer Man. That was December 2006. And I said, guys, in this first episode of Podcast Answer Man, I don't have all the answers, but I've been podcasting for a year. And I've already had some people ask me how to podcast, and I've been helping them. And, I have this crazy dream. Wouldn't it be nice if within the next 5 to 10 years I could do this full time? And so that's why I'm creating Podcast Answer Man, to start a podcast consulting business to see if I can start generating some income. 1 year after that, I quit my job in insurance and started podcasting full time. So that is probably a little bit longer than what you wanted, but hopefully it was at least a little bit of background on what motivated me to get started. And what really drew me to this was the fact that people were seeking encouragement, they were seeking inspiration, they were seeking help, they wanted hope and everything, and we were able to deliver that to them. So at first it was about just entertaining people, but then I learned that I was not just called to create content that was entertaining, but that it was educational, encouraging, and inspirational. And over time, what happened was I became less and less satisfied in my career as an insurance agent because I found, I believe, my true calling in life, which was serving people and helping people in this way. While I wasn't looking for some kind of different work, and I didn't think that my job was unfulfilling, once I discovered the real possibilities of what the internet brought to me, then I realized that my job as an insurance agent here in this geographic area of northern Kentucky was limiting the potential of what I feel God has created me to be.
That's amazing. And the internet has really, I just think, transformed so many lives, where it is easier now more than ever to start a business at very low cost and reach and have such a long reach. You know, globally, you can have listeners. I remember when I saw some of my statistics and saw people in Japan and Australia, I'm like, this is just so bizarre to see that there's people listening in on the show all over the world. And that's really fascinating. And the people that you can help, that really resonated with me. And that was one of the things that I totally loved about either blogging or podcasting. Now I do much more podcasting than I do blogging, but it just blew my mind how a total stranger or someone that I never met face to face would be so transparent and vulnerable in an email, sharing some very real pain and struggle. And I used to be a social worker, and I had that heart to serve and to minister. I wasn't necessarily in ministry, but I just had that heart to help. And I never got that piece fulfilled as a social worker, but I started getting it fulfilled through the podcasting because people wrote in, just like you said. You know, since you are, I have the same faith as a Christian, I think that, you can't underestimate the power of where you are in your words, and these podcasts and blogs can reach and minister to so many people. You don't have to be a pastor or a minister to, minister to others. It's actually, I find that the greatest life-changing conversations that I've had have not been on a mission trip or in a formal church outreach setting, but right here on my podcast. So I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. And what it does is it allows people to authentically hear our heart and our voice and our message, and it becomes an open invitation for them to get to know us in a non-threatening way. And then, of course, like you said, people come to the place where they know, like, and trust us, and they feel open enough through the internet to kind of risk and say, hey, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to ask for your advice. And it just opens up so many doors of opportunities. And the podcast, of course, can lead to business opportunities, which I think is what your audience is probably most interested in, is the business ramifications of what we can do. But I totally agree. One thing I can tell you is that after, I think it was about 2 years of podcasting, I got to the place where I officially, not only did I leave my career in insurance, but I officially stepped down from all official ministry-related positions within what I now call the local congregational gatherings. Anyways, I stepped out of that because I found that I was having a lot more impact through the work that I was doing, through the business that I had created, and the content that I was creating around that business as well. So, absolutely, we have a lot of opportunities out there.
Yes. Talking beforehand, I just commended you on, when I first reached out to you, you were very respectful and very polite, but also had, said, like, I currently have certain priorities that I'm working on. So I get a lot of these requests to be a guest on podcast. And, and I waited a long time, which totally not complaining about. I'm saying this because you set a great example of how to prioritize your schedule and set boundaries. And I think it's really difficult in the beginning, or for any entrepreneur. Actually, Michael Hyatt talks about the same thing. I think actually as you get more successful, it might be even harder to say no to people. But how do you balance? A lot of these listeners have jobs and they're building a side business, or they want to build a business and transition out of their job into something they create. but they have families, or, there's a lot more than just work in their lives. I remember when I was doing the full-time work as a social worker and then going home and building a business on the side, it was extremely tough. It was extremely tough. And I don't have small children, and I don't I'm younger. When I started 3 years ago, I was mid-20s and single, no children. So my life demands weren't as demanding as a lot of people have on their plate. I'm curious how you did it. I know you're demonstrating that now, but it wasn't always the case.
That's right. First of all, I love this topic, and I'm glad that we've chosen to go this way in our conversation. And I wish I could tell you that I successfully navigated that, and I can tell you all the things that I did in the beginning to help people in their journey of pursuing balance when they have so many different obligations, such as family and other things, and young children. I want to get back to that in just a second, and I promise you we'll come right back to that after I shortly address what you said about Michael Hyatt, because Michael and I are really good friends, and I love that quote, the first half of it, the more successful you become, and the actual second half of that statement that he'll always tell you, the more successful you become, the less accessible you'll have to become. And he got that quote, by the way, from Andy Stanley, who's a pretty well-known pastor in Georgia. And Andy Stanley also says another thing to follow that up, and Michael Hyatt will also tell you this after telling you, the more successful you become, the less accessible you'll have to become. But the follow-up that Andy gave is, you do for some what you wish you could do for everyone. So, for example, I'm at the place today where I get over 200 emails a day, and most of those emails have the words quick question. If not in the subject line, it's certainly within the first 2 or 3 sentences. So you can imagine there's no way I can do anything of value in growing my business if I answer 120 quick questions every day in my email.
Right.
So I have to find ways to graciously say no in a very quick and concise way, but still provide valuable resources and point them in directions where they might find some help and stuff like that. Basically what happens is I use this little program called Text Expander where I've pre-written out the things that are the most common questions, and within a couple keystrokes I'm able to have a response that's probably 3.5 paragraphs long. When I first wrote that response, it took me about 3 hours to craft it to where it is very helpful, very respectful. Matter of fact, when you interviewed me, I actually just typed one word. I typed the word interview with the word I in front of it, so there are 2 I's. And if I type in I interview, it replaces that word with, I think it was 3 or 4 paragraphs, which explains to you how many email requests a day I get, requesting interviews, how many people are currently on my list waiting for it, that I'd never take these lightly. I would love to do an interview with you, but here's when it might happen. And it's going to be probably a couple months. I've already checked out your show. I've already looked at it. I've added you to my list. And when I'm ready, this is how I will contact you. And thank you for your request. Now, if you read that, it probably felt as though I had just wrote that completely to you. But the reality is I send that same exact word-for-word message out to everyone who asks me for an interview. And basically what that little tip there did was it took something that if I was to respond to each and every request, that would have taken about 2 to 5 minutes to carefully and considerately respond to every one of those requests that I'm not available right now. But instead, when you emailed me, I looked at your name, I got your email address, and I looked at the podcast that you told me you had. It took me about a minute to see all that information and add it into my spreadsheet. I hit reply, typed in I interview, that's my keyword. It then filled out the rest of the email. I hit send, and I went on to the next email. So that's how I do that. And basically, for you at the time, I was less accessible. I was not accessible to you at that given moment in time. So what you got from me is a not right now response. And what I try to do when I say, there are sometimes quick questions will come in, and I'm like, you know what? I don't have time to answer 130, 170, whatever emails that came in or questions today. But I am going to take time to answer 3 or 4 of them. And that's probably going to take about 20 to 25 minutes per email. And I'm going to spend about an hour to 2 today answering a couple random questions, and I'm going to thoroughly respond to them. And I'm going to do for them what I wish I could do for every single person in my email inbox. And of course, that's going to blow them away. That's like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect that. But that's what you got to do, because I genuinely care about people. I want to serve people. And so that's one thing that I do, is I do for some what I wish I could do for everyone. But also, I have today become very big on what words you used before we hit the record button. I do have boundaries, and I have priorities. And a couple things that I've learned today is that, number one, my automatic response to anything and everything that's not a top priority has to be a no. And that is difficult for me because I am a recovering people pleaser. I want to serve everyone. And not only do I want to serve everyone to feel good about using the gifts and talents that I have to serve and help people, to add, to make me feel like I have more purpose in my life, but I also I want you to like me. And if all of a sudden you email me and I tell you I'm not available and I can't help you personally, I can't jump on a call with you right now, I can't give you that answer, even though I know it would only take 5 minutes, right? The reality is I don't want you to not like me. There's the possibility that if I tell you no, you might turn around and say negative things about me to other people. Oh, yeah, I reached out to that Cliff guy once, and he's too big for his britches, He forgot what got him to where he's going, so I don't want that. But the reality is I had to get over my people pleasing stuff, and I had to realize, first of all, to be able to be successful, I found that I needed to know what few things I was always going to say yes to. What are the most important things, the most essential things to help me accomplish my goals and my mission in my business and my life, and to fulfill what I believe is my mission and purpose for my life and my business. And once I have those, then I say, okay, well, anything that's in my email inbox or anything that's on my to-do list that has to do with this top 1, 2, or 3 priorities, my response to any request is, how can I say yes to this? Because it's going to move those things forward. Now, the thing is I have more than 3 priorities in my business. There are 10 or 12 lists of things that are important to my business. But anything below the top 3, my response is, what could possibly get me to say yes, because my automatic response is no. So my first 3 priorities are, well, how can I say yes to this? How can I fit it into what my schedule allows? And anything below that is automatically no. And is there any compelling reason why I have to make an exception here? And if not, it has to be a no. Even though it's good, even though it's important, and even though for somebody else it might be extremely urgent, but looking at my list of priorities, it's not in my top 3, so my automatic response has to be no. And the reason why it has to be no is because if not, I won't have balance in my life. Is any of this resonating with you, Stephanie, at all? The idea that it's difficult to say no to people?
Yes. I have a hard time as I'm growing in success. There's more and more emails that come in, more and more requests, more and more opportunities that I would have been just, I'm always honored. I'm always thrilled and honored that they come. In the very beginning, though, I remember it was crickets out there, and I would have just loved to be acknowledged by someone.
Yeah.
And now, they're coming in more frequently. And so in my mind, it's kind of this weird guilt thing that I have to fight, because it's almost like this voice or accusation of how ungrateful are you?
Exactly. And you know what? I'm so glad that you're tracking with this as well, because I find that those of us who have the heart of helping others, and I'm not even going to say it's those of us who are Christian. There are plenty of listeners that are listening right now that aren't Christian, but they have a desire to help and serve others. They are kind-hearted people. But I will give an example that will help those of us who are Christians who like to justify everything that we do, right, scripturally. Okay. So there's this story about Jesus, and you may or may not remember this one, but there's this story about Jesus. He and his apostles decided to stop in one of the towns where one of the apostles' parents lived, all right? They stayed with his mom. And while they were there, the Bible says that the entire village, the entire town, heard that Jesus had arrived. And what they did is they gathered up all of their sick and lined up at the door at the home of one of the apostles' parents. And so Jesus took them in that evening and one by one healed everybody who had come, right? So early the next morning, this is almost word for word, early the next morning before it was light, Jesus left the house and went and prayed in a solitary place. Now, what the Bible doesn't tell you, and I'm just going to infer some things that may have happened and make some assumptions here, okay? So we're departing from what's actually written, but you can imagine that everybody in town brought their sick the night before. Jesus is in town, and you can imagine probably in town and even some surrounding towns, there were people who didn't hear about it the first night and heard that Jesus had pretty much healed everybody who had come to the door the night before. Now other people lining up first thing in the morning waiting for Jesus to do day 2 of healing everyone, right? Mm-hmm. So we could probably assume that. Well, anyway, the Bible doesn't say that, but let's just assume that it might be true. What happens is the apostles wake up. There's all of these people waiting. We don't know that, but we do know the apostles woke up and found that Jesus wasn't there. And this is where I can tell you almost word for word. I don't have it in front of me. The apostles went out and they found where Jesus was praying. And they did say, Jesus, where have you been? And they did say, everyone's looking for you. And Jesus said, go back, get your stuff, and I will meet you in the next town, for that's what God has for me next. Mm. So what did Jesus do? Jesus just said no to anybody else who was at that place waiting for him to do what he had been doing all day the day before. See, even you can imagine that if Jesus would have just stayed there at the parents of one of the apostles' home every day, there would have been every single day, there would have never been a day where there wasn't a line of people to heal. But Jesus had other priorities, and he specifically said no to going back there and yes to doing what the next thing he felt that his Father had called him to do. Pretty interesting, huh?
Very interesting.
So
I never really dived into it that deep to really think about it, but that is most likely very true, how that went down. So that's amazing.
There are all kinds of expectations that people thought that Jesus would do that he didn't live up to. He went and did the things that he knew was his priority. And I think that's what we need to do. And here's the thing. I can tell you that today I am very happy to say, and I can say this without feeling any guilt whatsoever, I am an expert at saying no. I have become an expert in telling people no. And when I tell people no, my no is almost always very gracious, almost always. And not only that, but I almost always try to find a way to say no, but here's where you might go to find the help that you need. So I try to always, in my no's, give some kind of help in some kind of value in some way. But I'm very protective of the time and the boundaries that I have for the things that I will say yes to. And so my automatic response to pretty much everything is no, and I know already in advance what I'm going to say yes to. Those are the biggest advice. Now, here's what I can tell you. When I left my career in insurance and I started this business, first of all, we are a family of 5. I had 3 young kids at the time, all of them under the age of 10, and my wife was a stay-at-home mom, so I was the only income earner for our family. And I had just left my very successful, extremely well-paying career in insurance, and completely
that was also very secure,
which was very secure. And what happened was during the first year, I started my own business January 1st, 2008. So it was 10 years ago. No, 8 years ago. So anyway, I started it 8 years ago, and that first year, I worked 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, and never took a single day off until the 9th month of the year. In September, my wife finally convinced me to take Sundays off. And so I took Sundays off, and I just increased the number of hours that I worked the other 6 days a week.
Oh, my goodness.
And at the end of the year, and by the way, back then I was producing 7 to 15 podcast episodes per week of like 6 or 7 different podcast shows. I was doing consulting work. I was saying yes to everyone. I was saying yes to every possible opportunity. I did not want to miss out on any possible opportunity to generate income or to move the needle forward on my business. I said yes to everything. And so that's what happened. And at the end of the first year, to celebrate my first year doing business full-time for myself, I decided to do a 24-hour nonstop podcast marathon. And right around the 23rd hour, I started having severe stomach cramps like I'd never experienced before in my life. Turns out that I had very severe gallbladder attack, gallstones stuck in I had a gallstone stuck in my cystic duct. Ended up going to the hospital, and I spent the first 2 weeks of 2009 in the hospital and almost died because they needed to take out this gallbladder or gallstone out of my cystic duct, and the surgery to take that out, there was a 50% chance of making it through, they said. So it was optional, and they said if I didn't do that surgery, then there's a chance that the gallstone will never drop. But if they take out my gallbladder and the gallstone drops, then it's a guaranteed death. I would die from that. There's nothing they could do. And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll take the 50-50 chance and have you take it out because I'd rather, I do that. And then what happened was later that night, they came in for the permission forms. They said, I just need you to sign these forms to authorize the surgery tomorrow. You're having your gallbladder taken out. I said, no, I'm supposed to have this cystic duct surgery first. That's not what we have here. Go ahead and sign this, and we'll get it taken care of. I said, no, you bring the doctors back in and bring me the right forms. And so anyway, it was a terrible experience. And what happened was my health I had probably gained about 50 or 60 pounds that first year in doing business myself, and it was terrible. And not only that, the thing is today, so it's 8 years later, my daughter Megan was 8 years old at the time, okay? And my younger kids are younger than that at the time. And what I can tell you is that as a father, I missed some of the most crucial, most important aspects of being a father to my young daughter in some very crucial years. And it's only been within the last 3 years that I've been able to not necessarily make up for it, but to really connect deeper with my daughter. And within this past year, because of the success of my business, it's allowed me to have a lot of financial freedom. And just the two of us went to New York City for an entire weekend, and I was able to do that for her and stuff like that. And it's really taken a lot this past year to kind of mend almost, I would say, a neglectful relationship with my daughter for the first few years of building my business. So I can't tell you that I had this balance stuff worked out when I first started. And really for the first 3 to 4 years of my business, it was absolutely horrendous. And it's really only been after the first 3 to 4 years that finally I had the sense to wake up and say I need to find more balance in my life. And progressively, year after year, I've been more successful to where this year, taking it back to November 2014, I had gotten to the place where I weighed 268 pounds. I'm only 5'7". I weighed 268 pounds. I felt like I was starting to have all of these symptoms of diabetes. I was having like numbness in my fingers and all kinds of other issues, and just back pain nonstop, and just tired and lethargic all the time. And on November 14th of last year, I made a radical decision that I was going to start working out 6 days a week, every week for the rest of my life, and drastically change my lifestyle. And one of the things that I made the decision to do was that in 2015, so this year that we're in right now as we're recording, I made the decision that I was going to put my business on the back burner or put it on autopilot. There were a couple things that I knew that I could do, just the bare minimum in my business, and still provide enough income for my business to stay afloat and to provide all the minimum needs for my family. And anything outside of that, I would say no to everything else. And instead, I would actually take all of that priority of my business, how I'd always put my business above everything else. I would take all of that focus, all of that effort, all of that energy, and put it into my health and fitness instead. And over the past 13 months, I have lost 64 pounds. I've actually lost over 75 pounds of fat, and I've put on over 15 pounds of muscle.
Oh my goodness!
So
that's amazing.
A completely different lifestyle. And about September of this year, of 2015, I did start focusing on my business again. And I can tell you, for the last 4 months, I have successfully been full on back into business mode. But I can tell you that my fitness and my health comes first. I very rarely ever am in my office past 5 o'clock p.m. Very rarely ever. And it's very rare, unfortunately, it's very rare that I'm ever in my office before 10 a.m. So I am back, but you know what? The thing is it's very difficult, Stephanie, because I can't tell you how to achieve the success that I've had and have this level of balance in the beginning, and I wish I could. People all the time ask me the question, if you could go back knowing everything you know now, what would you do differently? And I guess if I would know a whole lot more about what works and what doesn't work in business. I have a lot more information about that. I do know a lot more about saying no to things and only saying yes to the most important things. But the reality is, Stephanie, without having lived through the last 8 years of this business, there's no way I would have gained that knowledge. I could have had people tell me, and probably I did, but until you go through and you learn it, it's tough. What I'm saying is that there's very few regrets that I have. I would say that I most regret the opportunities I missed with my oldest daughter, with my oldest child. Thankfully, I did not miss the most crucial times with my son and my younger daughter. I do regret what I allowed to happen to my health and my fitness as well. But in the reality, what that's opened up to me is, number one, it's opened me up to the opportunity to be a coach and a help and an encouragement to people who are starting in their business, who don't know what I do now or don't know what I know now. And so I'm able to coach them and come alongside them and help them in their priorities and help them understand about the things that I've learned. I'm able to help other people who have maybe spent the last couple of years head deep in their business and they've kind of ruined their relationship with their teenage daughter. I can actually help share my experience and how I've helped, how I'm working to mend that relationship and to feel a little bit of fulfillment in that area as a father. And for the people who have let their health deteriorate to the point where they're almost 300 pounds, I'm able now to come alongside those people and be a coach and help them learn how to find fitness and find health in this stage of their season or this season of their life. And hopefully how to help some people in the earlier stages avoid it by being more physically active and making time for those things. So it's hard for me to say that I regret all of those things because of what that experience has now opened the door of opportunity for me to serve others. Does that all make sense?
It does. I think it's, you transformed it and you changed it. You learned the lesson and you get to pass the lesson and the wisdom on. I think it's great that you're not looking back in the past, beating yourself up forever. You've made the change and you're moving forward. I mean, you're not necessarily living in denial of what happened, but you're choosing to keep pushing forward and do what you can today to change and to live a more balanced and better life and to help other people. And right. I think, some people that make decisions that they later regret, I see a lot of people living in regret and never moving forward. So I think that you, again, are setting a good example of let's just, you made that decision in November to change things, for your health and get everything in balance. And you've been staying committed ever since. That's huge progress. Huge. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is that if people said, Cliff, how could you achieve the success that you have today if you didn't do what you did? And the answer is, I don't know, because I only did it one way, so I can't go back and try it a different way. But one of the things that I'm very passionate about, I've spent a lot of time helping people launch podcasts, and as you can imagine, people who are looking to launch a podcast. Many of them are not just looking to launch a podcast as a hobby, but they're looking to launch a podcast to help them gain trust and exposure for their business pursuits that they're having. And so it's a real privilege that I have today. I have this course called Podcasting A to Z. And for 4 weeks, I coach them step by step through the process of how to launch a podcast. And I've helped thousands of people do that. And so the process is pretty simple for me, but what it allows me to do is take several students for 4 weeks and help them reset some expectations about what it's like, what can they realistically expect as far as income, as far as podcast audience, and how quick is this going to grow? Because it's always a little concerning when I have somebody says, Cliff, I'm so excited to start my podcast. My goal is to be able to leave my job in 6 months and do podcasting full time. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. It's like, tell me the size of your audience now. Well, I don't even have social media set up yet. Tell me how to do that.
No one knows me.
Like, nobody knows who I am. It's like, let me tell you, it took me, first of all, it was 2 years before I left my career in insurance, and I don't know that I would ever suggest anybody leave their career after just 2 years and jump into it full time, because what I didn't tell you earlier, that first year in 2008, I worked all those hours. My business paid for all of its expenses, meaning that it paid for all of its overhead. It paid for my accountant to do my taxes, and it paid for health insurance for my family because that was a business expense. But as far as paying the employees, which, by the way, there was only one employee, and that was me.
Yeah, paying yourself.
So as far as paying me, my net income for 2008. Now, the business was profitable, okay? Business made profit from year one. But as far as paying its employees, it paid a total of $11,000 net income that year. And that was a significant pay decrease for me. January of 2008, I lived off of my Christmas bonus from my last year as an insurance agent. And let's see here, February, March, and April, I lived off of our tax refund from the year before. And then for 3 months, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I actually took out a $14,000 withdrawal from my pension account, which I had to pay $4,000 of that to taxes and penalties for early. Yeah. Yep. Thankfully, that was before the stock market crashed. So even though everybody told me that was the worst thing you could do, it actually ended up being better than a loan. So we lived for 3 months off of that extra $10,000. And then by the end of the year, the business was able to pay a net of $11,000 for those last 3 months. That's how we lived in 2008. And so,
you're like white-knuckling it. You're like, okay, how can we get through?
And that's why I worked all of those hours. And I know today, knowing the things that I know now, there are some things I could have done differently. But when you don't know, you don't know. And so I guess if there's any advice that I have to people, find somebody who is doing what it is you want to do, who are achieving the level of success that you want to eventually achieve, and then work with somebody who's been down the road who can realistically tell you what it's going to take and what steps you should do to get there. And sometimes the advice that I have to people is go out and get a job. It sounds to me like the job that you have right now is demanding of your time and emotion and energy. Go find another steady paying job, day job, that is less emotionally and mentally demanding, so that when you're not working there, you have a lot more mental capacity to put a couple hours of strategic time into building this side business so that you don't have to work around the clock. That's my recommendation. And if you have somebody who can coach you along through that process, I think that can help.
Thank you so much, Cliff. I mean, I could talk to you. We're coming close to almost an hour, so I want to honor your time. I have really loved listening to your story, and I mean, I could expound on the whole, how difficult it is financially in the early years of your business and how much hours you put in. And I think for a newbie, that is one thing that I don't think people realize. That was one big eye-opener and shocker to me, was that I heard all of these people saying, I built my business in 2 years. It generated over 6 figures, and then after 2 years, I could hire my husband. Or in 6 months, I built a 7-figure business. And you hear all of these stories, and if you're in a job you really don't like you just want that to be you so bad, and it's kind of a big shock to realize that it does not happen that fast. It's not that easy, and you don't know the background of these people that may have built $1 million businesses in 3 years or 6 months or however long, what their background was or how many other failed businesses they've had or whatever situation. Everyone's so different. But, I mean, for me, I was very naive with thinking that I would be able to make it big in a very short amount of time. I had no business or marketing background or sales or anything. I knew nothing about business or any of that. So I had to learn completely from scratch on my own through podcasts, through making mistakes, through reading books. I was a self-learner, and I did take action, and I learned what worked, what doesn't. And I'm still learning, and one thing is it does take time, and I don't think people, especially if they're in a job they don't like, I don't think they want to hear that. But I agree that, if it's really bad, then transition to a new job. Find something, get yourself mentally in a better space, in a better place, so you have more energy and creative margin to really think clearly. I was an emotional mess, and I think I just was so desperate to get out of where I was that I wasn't making the smartest decisions or making the best moves or even really presenting myself well, because there was a sense of desperation of I'm just trying to build enough revenue so I can get out, rather than it's really I'm serving you, the customer or the client. That's got to be your priority. If it's about you getting out of whatever uncomfortable situation you're in, I think people can pick up on that, and I think it actually can stunt the growth of your business.
Absolutely.
At least in my experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that a term that I learned in that first year is it's called the mindset of scarcity. And when you're stuck in a mindset of scarcity, you make all kinds of decisions that are all about self-preservation, and you don't grow and have success in life when all the decisions that you make are all about how they help you. And so get into a situation where you're not so desperate for the business to benefit you all the time. You want to get to where you can have a mindset of abundance, of saying, you know what, I'm taken care of. Now, how can I use the gift and the ability and the talents that I have to serve and help others? And sometimes those may not be all that profitable in the beginning, but they will be an investment that will pay off in time. And when you can help others and serve others and add value to other people's lives, and it's not a requirement that those things immediately pay off for you financially, that's when you can start doing things in your business and doing things that is going to help you in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So how can the listeners connect with you if they want to start a podcast, or just, reach out to you and thank you for inspiring them and being so transparent? How can they find out more about you and more, especially podcasting A to Z course?
Sure. I would encourage anybody just to start out at podcastanswerman.com. And if you've never checked out Podcast Answer Man, my podcast, it's a weekly show that I do. And there's tons of information there. And by the way, even if you have zero interest in doing a podcast, but you have a small business, my podcast has changed focus after 430 episodes now. I kind of covered everything you can cover about launching a podcast, and I still address those topics from time to time. But my show is all about taking your message, your business, and your life to the next level. And so I share every week content that is helping people take their businesses and their life to the next level, kind of what we've talked about here today. So Podcast Answer Man, the podcast.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Cliff. It was just such an honor. I really enjoyed this interview. Time flew by really fast. enjoy your New Year at this time where we're in between Christmas and New Year. So
thank you so much, Stephanie. Again, I really value the opportunity to have this exposure to your audience, and I do wish them and you and everyone a very happy and blessed New Year. To be able to be successful, I found that I needed to know what few things I was always going to say yes to. What are the most important things to help me accomplish my goals and my mission in my business and my life, and to fulfill what I believe is my mission and purpose for my life and my business? Looking at my list of priorities, it's not my top 3, so my automatic response has to be no. And the reason why it has to be no is because if not, I won't have balance in my life.
So that was Cliff Ravenscraft, extremely transparent, very, very generous in sharing with us his lessons, his journey, and I love this guy. I've been listening to him for a while. I've known about him for years, so I was just so thrilled and so honored to be able to actually have a conversation with him. Amazing guy. So go check his podcast out. He's got so many good things to say. You're missing out if you're not connected with him. Listen to Podcast Answer Man, even if, like he said, you don't want to podcast or you're not interested in it. He talks about more topics than just podcasting. Very inspiring. I'm sure you really valued this interview and got a lot. So just keep getting plugged in. Get more of him, because he's a great person to be inspired by and to have be your virtual mentor and really just help excel your life, career, business, whatever. And if you have not done so already, make sure that you are subscribed to the Moved by Purpose newsletter, where you get exclusive sales, discounts, offers, and bonus materials and products from me on that newsletter. And I will be promoting my first course. This is not a group coaching product. This is a course that you can take at your own pace. It is about mastering your mindset. I just had a seminar on this, and now I have made it a program that you can learn at your own pace in case you couldn't come into the Detroit area to go to this live event. So I am very excited about this. I'm not sure when it will be launching, but I am finalizing it right now. The goal is to be ready by January or February, but if you're interested, you will get an early bird discount if you email me and let me know that you're interested in Mindset Mastery. So make sure in the subject line you say Mindset Mastery Early Bird in the subject line, and I can connect you with all the information you need, put you on the list to ensure that you get early bird access and discounts, and you'll have greater accessibility to me than those that do not take advantage of it. So high value, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. It will really transform your life. So make sure you check that out. Okay, everybody have a beautiful new year. And I know it might be after the new year by the time this airs, but nonetheless, I hope you are enjoying the new year, and I love you all dearly. Talk to you all next week.